Welcome to Legacy Unscripted, sponsored by Progeny Coaching. This is the podcast where sports and business collide. I'm your host, Russ Katzman, and here we'll skip the fluff and get straight to the hustle. From athletes turned entrepreneurs to impact-driven business leaders, we'll dive into the wins, the lessons, and some of those failures that make our legacies worth living. Today, I'm happy to welcome Toby Henderson, currently the CEO of SYNDYT. Toby, thanks for joining us. You've got quite the varied background, and people may know your name from a number of things. Talk to us about how you've ended up in SYNDYT.
Yeah, Russ, thanks for having me. Long story, I guess. As an athlete, I always wanted to create product. And I remember towards the end of my riding career, I wanted to make products that I didn't have as an athlete. That was kind of where my focus was. If I had a certain stamp, handlebar, whatever the idea was, if I had this, could I go faster? Could I win more races? And this is my mindset towards the end of my career. And I lasted until I was 38. I retired at 38 years old, which is quite older for the cycling industry. Anyway, so I went into that mindset, trying to create product, and through the trials and tribulations of that, I want to here at SYNDYT, allowing me to actually do everything I need to do. I'm focusing on BMX racing and the juvenile market as a whole at this point. We'll talk a little bit later about my mountain bike career and my mountain bike product lines I've done in the past. I've done a lot of different things, but right now I'm focused on this BMX race thing, and that's resources are probably one of the issues, but secondly, it's allowing me to really create products that really enhance your performance, which is my original goal since I was 12 years old. So yeah, that's how I wound up here.
So why is it important to you to, and I'm probably leading with this question, to get this out there for the next generation, right? Why is that important for you now that you've retired and kind of stepped away from the sport itself to an extent?
Well, I think I have a passion for it more than anything. My brain just keeps thinking about if we have this, and from the experiences I had as an athlete, if I can give the athletes these things, can they excel? Can they go faster? Can the sport become more enjoyable? These kind of things, and we've accomplished some of those goals. 20 years ago, I created a tire, which kind of changed the way we all look at tracks and the way that BMX tracks and the way that we all perform. And now everybody's tire is the same way. So it's which is, we'll talk maybe a little bit about that, about the knockoffs and the problems they have, overcoming that stuff. But I think the passion of it and just doing it because I have that know-how and not having some of these things as an athlete and having these experiences as an athlete by not having those products drives me to want to give our athletes, our current generations, these type of items that I think we can bring to market. So
that's terrific. And I love the purpose. So yeah, I do want to take you back 20-something years ago to when you began to transition into business, because it's something, part of the purpose for this podcast is to help those that are athletes transition to life post-athletics. And a lot of times that involves starting a business and becoming a business person. And there's a different mentality in starting a business than what you had as an athlete. So talk to me a little bit about that transition for you. What was that like, if you can recall?
Well, it wasn't easy. And I want to kind of, when you bring that up, Russ, I want to talk a little bit about guys in my BMX career who didn't make that transition. And I always just talked about child star syndrome, right?
Yeah. We
were huge stars in the 80s as athletes and BMX guys. Because BMX just in the 80s was just huge. And the point where you couldn't even walk through a crowded area at a BMX event or whatever without being mobbed and autographs and trying to get your clothes off you, these kind of things from people. It was quite crazy. So when you have that experience, to not have that experience later on and not be that person, and this is why my second career happened. We'll get into that a little later. But I think that transition out of that child star syndrome thing is a very tough thing to do. And at the end of my mountain bike career, I was sitting in my pool. A year had gone by. And I had 2 young children because I didn't have the kids until I was done racing. And I'm like, how am I going to support myself? I made a lot of money doing it, but not enough to retire. So how am I going to support myself? And it goes back to when I was 12 years old, working in a bike shop and just was touching product all day long and really enjoyed that experience in the bike shop. But then the racing thing got in the way. I spent 20 years as a racer. And I came back to that thought at 12 years old about making product. And then with all that experience, I started applying that. But I want to touch on the child star syndrome thing because that was a part of me seeing other guys not come out of that and actually go down a really bad hole, right, in a black spot. Right. So, so for me, it was able to, one, keep my credibility with the family and the friends and all that to make sure I was doing something in my life, but also finding out how am I going to do that. So I started applying those ideas to a career. But the one thing that really got me started at the end of my career, people were coming to me with ideas, wanted me to test a fork, wanted me to do certain things. And I had my first partner in THE, my very first company, wanted me to test a fork, and I was still at this time, I was, a suspension fork. And I was really, at this point, I was really in tune with suspension and the things I've been working on for years. And I looked at him and I said, why do you want to do that? You're going against all these big dogs. Let's come up with some other idea. And he goes, well, tell me what you're thinking. And I just lost a race where I had to pull a tear off. It's a muddy, snowy event. I'm coming down the hill, and in downhill mountain biking at the time, your top 5 guys in a 5-minute run are on the same second. That's how competitive it was. So I went to pull a tear off, and I flubbed a little bit, half a second. My feet didn't touch right, and I'm reaching for my goggles trying to see, and I lost, by a half a second or whatever. And I thought, man, if I didn't have all that mud in my face, I wouldn't have to reach for that tear off, and could I have won? And this is what it all starts for me, is this, what we talked about earlier, is how it all started, is those experiences and turn it into a product. So anyway, I said, I need something to keep the mud out of my face. And him and I started walking around. We didn't know what we were going to make. And we walked into a bike shop, and we knew we wanted some kind of coverage to keep the mud out. We walked into a bike shop, and we saw a helmet, and we saw how polycarbonate was formed on vacuum forming, and it just kind of, both of our light bulbs went off. Say, hey, if we vacuum form a fender, right, we can stick it on the bottom of Toby's bike and he keep the mud out of his face. So we created this fender and made it a real motocross style, which at the time the mountain bikes have become 8 inches of travel, and they look somewhat like a motorcycle anyway. And man, it took off. We did 500,000 of fenders in 2.5 years. Wow. And then all the knockoffs came and this and that. I thought, hey, I'm a great businessman. I know what I'm doing, right? And we had 9 employees, and we were just killing it all over the world. We were, and then the knockoffs started coming. This was called THE, Toby Henderson Enterprises. It was Duff Fender. And then one of my big customers now today, and at the time, come out with those fenders, because they actually just took my fender, knocked it off 100%, called them those fenders, and started pushing these cheap versions of them into the market. Then one day we wake up, they weren't cool anymore. Just they weren't cool. Everybody took them off. Now here I have 9 employees. I have this huge overhead, and we're going 100 miles an hour. We didn't have anything to back it up. Boom! That thing was over quick. So it was stardom to nothing at one point. So that's how I think I learned my real business attributes at that point. Was you really got to look to the future. You have to be innovating all the time, and you can't get caught in that situation where you pumped out a lot of things. A lot of people copied you. And then at the end, when the customers don't want it, the consumer trends change. Are you ready for it? And how do you adapt, and how do you move forward? So anyway, at that point, my partner wanted out, and he sold his portion of the company to one of my sponsors, a Korean gentleman with HAC helmets. And I was riding for Vigor helmets at the time. And we moved THE over to a different building, and I took control of that company and created my first real big company that I was the boss of, which was called VSI at the time. And we dominated mountain bike helmets, went against Troy Lee Designs pretty heavily. We had a BMX brand called Intense. I created this tire I spoke about earlier that literally changed the way the bikes performed on the track. And off we went running, and I spent 8 years doing that. And through that whole time, I was still young. I was early 40s. I just had no business experience, but I knew product. Now here I'm running a company I think we finally got up to over $6 million. We had 25 employees. And I'm running this company with really no business experience, right? And it's all about the product. So anyway, coming towards that, it's a long story, but my partner had other companies inside the business, and those companies started not doing well. He was intermingling the money, and when I got there, it was the other way around. The other companies were doing really well, and the company I came in charge of wasn't. So the money was kind of all being shared. And anyway, when my company started being successful and the other ones weren't, then I felt like, hey, man, this money should be coming more towards my way anyway. So I wound up leaving that company and starting Box Components. And I spent 12 years there. And I'm still there. I'm still the founder of the company. I still actively guide the company in their direction. But at one point with Box, we tried to do mountain bike drivetrain. I was asked by the factory to do that. So I'm involved with the factory at Box. And they, with the BMX stuff, that was natural. We came in, we're immediately at the #1 BMX company within the first 2 years, created all this new product coming from my VSI days over to Box. And then they came to me and said, hey, we want to get in the mountain bike side. And I'm a mountain bike guy too. Of course, I want to be in mountain biking. It's probably 100 times bigger than BMX. So sure, I want to be in that. So we went down the path of mountain bike drivetrain. And now here we are 7, 8, maybe 9 years later, I think, and we're struggling with that that product line. It's just it's probably $20 to $40 million to even try to even think to be in that side of the business. We did it. We came to market with it. We're known as a player in that market, but we are not having the success that my Fenders have by any means, right? So anyway, I started focusing a little bit more on the BMX stuff. And for me to really create better products for BMX, I needed a frame partner. And I tried other companies who made BMX frames, but during COVID, I created this bottom bracket, which now is on the new SYNDYT bikes. It really changed the way athletes are performing, right? We'll get into that in a little bit, but anyway, so I gave this idea to a frame maker. It was somewhat of a partner of ours, customer of ours, and it took about a year to make it. Of course, COVID's going on, and then when I got it, it was backwards.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yeah, they took the drawing and flipped it, and they made me this frame, and it was backwards. So what do? We got to go back and wait another year for this thing to be fixed again. Right? And now I've got Box's future in the hands of a frame maker. And for me, that wasn't the right thing to do. So I thought I got to make my own frame. My partners in Taiwan weren't into that because we were still trying to make the drivetrain happen. Because in the drivetrain world, Shimano would not make a bike. It's just a no-no. But in the BMX thing, it's so small. A lot of my competitors have a bike and they have component lines. It's quite common. But none of them are innovating like I want to. So basically, I started a frame company, and it allowed me to start to innovate the product, the components differently. Because if I want to grow a part, if I want to change a part of a component to make it perform, I got to have a frame that goes with it. So SYNDYT was born, and I did that. And I created this frame that has a special bottom bracket in it. We call it B52. Of course, it takes the Box components to put inside the frame, so it's a combination of both items. But it's basically an oversized bottom bracket, which is a 35 millimeter spindle, and the bearings are now put back inside the frame. Because over the years, we all were riding these Euro BBs, they're called, and the bearings have gotten bigger, the stuff have gotten stronger, and all that, but the bearings became outside of the shell because you couldn't fit them inside the frame. It goes back to the whole thing where the frame's constrained, the component makers, and the component makers, vice versa. They got to work together. Anyway, so I created this bottom bracket standard, and I think it belongs in other disciplines. I know it's a performance enhancing product, but it's going to take me 10 years just to make that bottom bracket a standard. I know it. I talked to bottom bracket makers that have these great patents on certain items, but nobody wants to get into it right away because the quantities are small. Anyway, so a lot of my experience from innovating comes from the constraints of resources and the trends of getting your consumer to follow you or the industry to follow you. And I feel like I'm a leader in it, but sometimes I feel like I'm, just keeping my head in tough water with these ideas, but my brain doesn't think any other way. And I think it goes back to the Fender. If I didn't do that, it probably would never happen. Funny thing is that's 30 years ago, and now it's cool again. So,
there you go.
Yeah,
what's old becomes new again, right?
Yeah, so they had a vintage mountain bike show at Seattle last week, and that was one of the big topics was the THE stuff, and people are trying to find it and ask me to bring the brand back and all these kind of things. But yeah, so anyway, Russell, I know I was long-winded, but that's basically how SYNDYT started. And you know, it's funny. I've had a lot of brands, and I've created and moved a lot of brands, probably half a dozen, quite successful. But I've only really had 2 jobs. Now this third one in my life. It's not like I, you know, bounced around companies. No, I've done
Right.
these brands with inside these companies I've created, and we've won awards. I've won probably half a dozen awards. I've got patents and things like that. But you know, from the Taipei show to the German Eurobike show to Men's Journal, these are the people at the Interbike show who've given me awards for some of my ideas. Right. So anyway, here I am today trying to create SYNDYT.
No, it's a great story. And there's a lot of, gosh, I mean, we could talk forever about some of these lessons that you've had along the way. I mean, you said it just a few minutes ago that there's days we think we've got it figured out. And then there's days you look at it and you're like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And I think that's pretty much the entrepreneurial lifestyle, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you're doing what I'm doing, what you're doing, what, you know, some of our listeners, I mean, you think you've got it, and it's just a journey.
I know we have probably the best performing frame in the history of the sport. I think we do, but it doesn't mean that my distribution channels, my pricing, my color choices, doesn't mean all that's right. You know, so there's a lot of things that go with that. But I think as an athlete too, it's the same thing. You might be at a track doing a downhill run, think you got those corners figured out, and you're standing there watching your competitor go by, go completely different line. Oh man, I don't know what I'm doing, right? That guy. Right, so I think it goes in life itself, right? Sometimes people just have different ways to do the similar things and are better at it, right? So,
yeah. Well, I want to take you back to the Fender issue originally, the THE Fender. I mean, I think the interesting lesson there is about product life cycle, right? And our need to continually innovate to new products, right? Because that life cycle, it'll come up. You know, the product as it starts to be known, it'll come up. Ideally, it's a hockey stick, similar to what you saw, where it goes through the roof, and then kind of level off over a little while, if it can stabilize. But at some point, it's going to fall off, and you don't know if it's going to be here or if it's going to be over there somewhere. And unfortunately, with you, you know, with knockoffs and everything else, that was shortened considerably, and without another product in the mix ready to hockey stick for you, it ended up hurting the business. And I think it's a great lesson that I'm sure you utilize today, which is, you know, you even said it yourself. I'm not going to leave this business dependent on any single component. I'm going to make sure that I have multiple revenue streams, multiple components, multiple products that are feeding into this.
Right. And if you're in a small niche sport like BMX that I'm in, and kind of dominant in many products in the past, it kind of allows me to do that a little bit because it's the same customer, it's the same consumer. It does allow me to do that. Where on the mountain bike side, it was, even though it's a much bigger product line, I couldn't diverse from the drivetrain. For example, we have different price points, but before I got into the drivetrain, I was doing handlebars, stems, wheels. I was doing a lot of mountain bike stuff, similar to my BMX program. But my engineers and my staff cannot keep up my brain. I'm not boasting about that, but they just couldn't. So I said, okay, guys, let's focus on. So we took away all the stems. We took away the handlebars. We took some of this stuff away to let them focus only on drivetrain, which is it's a big feat. You know, we had, we probably had 5 engineers at one point. Now we're down to like 2.5. We had like 5 or 6 guys working on it at one point. But SRAM has 300. I heard Shimano has 3,000. You know, engineers, right? So how do you compete against something like that, right? So this is when it goes to resources and some of my obstacles in the past. I mean, there's some ideas in my head right now I want really bad. Could change the sport, literally, but where do I come up with the resources to do that? And I was talking to somebody yesterday about a current thing I'm working on, which is outside the bicycle. It's more in the protection line. And they're looking at me like, yeah, it's a great idea, got NDAs and all that, but you know how difficult and hard and long this path is? But I don't think like that. I think like this will work. This will change things. This will make every athlete's going to have this product if I can get it done, you know? So anyway, so yeah, it's what I do and what I enjoy and how I thrive off of. I'm now a little bit older. I'm kind of empty nesting a little bit, so I have more time to spend on the companies and the ideas. And although my wife wants to probably wants to retire a little bit more than I do, but
Yeah.
I'm still going at it, and that's the most important part, I think. So,
Well, when you've got a business, when you're building businesses around stuff that you love, it's hard to walk away when that time comes. And we all think we could ride off into the sunset and go drink margaritas on a beach or something, but sometimes when you love what you're doing, that's not the easiest thing to do.
yeah, I was out with my son last night. It's like, what do I, I don't have a whole lot of hobbies, and I love what I do. So sure, we'd like to go see a play now and then, but I mean, I don't really go to the bar and hang out. So what am I going to do with all this time if I wasn't doing that? So it is what it is, right? So.
Well, let's take you back to those times when you didn't have all that time available to you.
Yeah.
It's interesting how much you've talked about the different products and ideas you have in your head and all of that. How do you balance being a product guy and having these ideas and visions for different things that you could do with being a CEO and having to have a P&L that you answer to and having to make money for yourself and or any investors or anything like that? How do you balance those two for yourself?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a tough thing for me. I find myself, and probably a downfall, I find myself more on the product side of it because it's what interests me. And I let the other stuff kind of get loose a little bit on me, but I do have to come back to this stuff during quarter reports, tax time, these kind of things. I have to come back to it and learn it. And luckily, in the past couple companies, I quickly learned able to put people around me that can help me with that. And I think that that's important, to bring good people around you. When I got involved with BSI and took over that company, it was already established. I just brought my brands there. So It's already an accounting department. But I quickly became the CEO because no one really had a vision of where the company should be going. And we did have some cash flow that was existing. We talked about it earlier about the multiple companies inside of one building. But then when I started Box, I had a budget. When I got out of the other company, I had a budget to bring people in. And I brought people in that could help me with some of that stuff, with the P&Ls, with the taxes, or at least pay the tax guys to do that, do accounting for me. So I was able to bring those right people around me. So I really focus on the product. But with SYNDYT, I don't have that group. I didn't have the same resources coming in. So I'm trying to do all that myself. But funny is, when I left VSI and started Box, one of the things I wanted to do was, when I got to VSI, there was already a lease. There was already things moving. There was already insurance. And my family's in the insurance business. I really didn't get a chance to learn all that until I started Box. And I wanted to learn that. And I thought that was one of the things that I wanted to understand and learn about leasing and about insurance and about accounting. I wanted to do that. And I did at Box. And I figured I got my own lease, my own buildings. I understood that. In leases, how different they can be between landlords and that kind of thing. And the taxes and all that kind of stuff, and the P&Ls, I really wasn't in charge of BSI. So I taught myself all that through my Box years. So now I'm able to bring all that over to SYNDYT. I've learned about fixed overhead and how to keep it down, and how to use 3PLs instead of our own warehousing department, just things that have happened in the last 12 years, the trends. I think it's out of a necessity more than anything. You have to figure out a way to be competitive and keep your business, somewhat on the right track. But at the end of the day, Russ, my head's in product. I walk in the morning, and the first thing I look at is the emails from overseas at night, and the first ones I answer is the product.
Well, it's interesting.
Sometimes I do another,
It's interesting you still choose to do both, because I have seen product guys who just say, you know what, and it's a humble time for them to do it, but they will say, look, I'm not meant to be a CEO. I just want to innovate. I just want to build products, right? Maybe they're a little more introverted. They're an engineer style mind, and they're a little more introverted, and they say, I just want to make cool stuff. Let somebody else deal with all the other shit and go be the face of the organization, that kind of stuff. I'll back off. I'll be COO or chief of product or whatever, title you want to give me. Just let me go make stuff. Let somebody else run the business side of this.
Well, I'll tell you why. When I had THE, back when the Fenders were really successful, my partner and I, we wanted to be product guys. We really wanted that. So we handed our distribution to a company called Surface. Ray, the people, they're a great company. They were dealer oriented. They had outside reps. They really knew what they were doing as far as that side of the business, but they weren't product guys. I thought, what a great opportunity this is for me to just be a product guy. So we sold them all the product. We became partners in a sense of they were my sole distributor of THE. Man, it wasn't 3 months later where he's not wanting to buy something he's run out of stock of. He didn't want to do some of the stuff the company really needed. And I remember I was headed to a race, and I wanted to get 30 number plates to take down the race and do what I do. I go and I put them on all the pros' bikes, and the pictures happen and the people see the product, and this is how you do things. And he wasn't there, and the company didn't want to hand me 30 number plates, which was $100 for the product, right? And I thought, this is not going to work. So at that point, I realized if I don't do the whole thing, and I don't be the decision maker, I can't see these things get through to where I want them to be. So back to your question is, if I'm not making those kind of critical decisions, I don't see how the brand can ever be what it is. You can have great product, but if the guy above you doesn't have the same vision, right? Then you're begging for your life all this time trying to get there. So yeah, that's why I decided to do this job. That's why I decided to do what I did, was that experience. I'm not in control of the brand. I'm not in control of the development or where these things go or the marketing or whatever it is, or where this stuff belongs in the world. Who's going to do that for me? And that's why I continue to be this guy. Yeah.
Yeah. Another one of those tough lessons you learn along the way, but a great one to share. I appreciate you throwing that out there.
I had nothing against those guys. They're awesome. But I went back to him with SYNDYT and said, hey, I got this opportunity. You still could do this, but at this point, that company's, they've made their money. They're in a different place, and they're not going to they're not going to pull the bootstraps up and do what I need to do with this company. So it is what it is. But yeah, all the people I've worked with in the past, I've never had any regrets with any of them. But again, it goes back to, I think, what you just asked me. If I don't lead it and don't go and do it the way I want it to go, I don't think I can get it as successful as I have in the past by succumbing to somebody else's decision. Of course, sometimes people are more versed on what I should be going, and maybe I should be listening a little bit more. There's that too.
Well, I think we just talked about doing what you love and being able to build what you love. But I think sometimes entrepreneurs get into this and they say, all I want to do is take pictures, or all I want to do is make products, or all I want to do is write essay, or do copywriting or writing essays, or create content, or create videos, or some of that kind of stuff. But somebody else run all the business side of it. And to your point, I don't think they properly understand all of the decisions they're giving up at that point, and all of the execution of the vision that is dependent on that leader role, that they are sacrificing by sticking into a specific part of the business.
Well, I've been lucky is that I've had partners along the way, and I've always had help with various resources. And most of those people have been agreed to let me be the one to make those kind of decisions. They're the ones who really say, okay, if you're going to make this whatever it is, let you decide what that is, and let you decide how to market that. Let you decide that. Even though I'm the one paying for the tool or getting your tire to market with you, you're the one that's telling me what that tire should look like and who we should target it and what the circumference of it should be, right? We have to deal with, right? So, but yeah, so I've been really lucky and fortunate to have people around me to see that value and allow me to do what I do. So that's been good. So
good. So let's talk a little bit about the patent process, because clearly early on you learned what happens with knockoffs. Talk to me about later on as you started to get into the patent process and the tasks related to that. What does that do to a product guy when you know that you've got to get through this extended patent period afterwards?
Yeah, so I'm working on something right now. I don't want to talk too much about those things in the future, but yeah, I didn't have the resources to do it, but I went to the factory and said, hey, this is what we're going to do, and this is where we're going to go. They're making this product for other people, similar products for that, but here's my vision, here's my idea. We need to do a legal forensic on this to make sure that we can actually make this thing, right? So, right? We don't want to get caught because, at Box in the drivetrain, we've been sued 3 times by the other guys I mentioned earlier. I won't take names, but so we learned kind of our hard lesson on that. We had a product that came to market. We owned the patent at the time, and we bought the patent, and then we went to market. We had it in 35 countries. And the other guy came to us and said, no, you can't do that. We applied for that patent 30 days prior to your patent. We were denied. And so we really have rights to this. And we think we could have fought it, we could have done it, but you're talking about a $4 billion company, we're a $4 million company. So how's that going to happen? Right? So ain't going to happen. So anyway, I think that we just do our due diligence on that. And if I really have something I'm comfortable with, using the factors will help me with that and back me up on that. And the few patents I do have, they're getting kind of old, but they're just things that I want as an athlete and things that I think that should be right. And I got 2 more right now that I'm working on. The problem is with that is, yeah, they're kind of expensive going in, but they're way more expensive to maintain and or fight for. That's the problem. So sometimes I might give that up a little bit. Say, you know, the thing is I would like to see some of these things leave the BMX field and turn into a road bike or a much bigger category. But I could see that protecting that in those categories quite costly, right? So BMX sales aren't going to ever justify, chasing a patent or defending a patent with a road bike company, So,
Right.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of the trials and tribulations. I sometimes think of it as flattery when I see this stuff copied, but at the same time it hurts because, I start losing my shit on my sales or I start seeing that go otherwise. The Fender, for example, man, the Germans, they took that and they ran with it. The stuff was always uglier. It fit better because they're Germans and they're better engineers than, well, obviously I am, but they never looked the same way as mine did. So I never really felt that if any of these things, they're not going to do it the same way I do it. And usually my stuff actually seems to hold up okay in the market just because that little touch of design element or athlete experience or whatever that I'm different than the other guys. So we kind of hang our hats on that. But there is, when I look at these things, there is a thought process to patents, whether we should do it or not, and does that expense justify this idea or not? And sometimes I lean on the factories who are making similar products, and that's going to help with that. So that's kind of how I do it at this point.
And I think there's we talked about the product life cycle. I think understanding what is the life cycle for this? Is it going to be around for a year, 2 years, maybe a season, right? If that's the case, if it's only going to be hot for a season, why spend a couple of years getting to patent on this thing and having it die after 6, 8, 10 months?
I think most of the stuff I've done have walked much longer than a season. I think the TG helmet, which was a huge success.
Yep.
If you don't change after 3 or 4 years with that, you better change the shape of that helmet, because even though it's still a helmet, you can't. It's got to look different. You can't. You just think that has a 10-year shelf life. No way, because it's more of a design. It's a personality for people to wear a helmet. They put this on their head. It's an extension of who they are, and a certain shape to certain people is different. But a tire that changes things or a crank or something could have a 10-year shelf life. So I think there's different shelf lives between different products. And right now, I created a box 12 years ago. And it's time to remake all the stuff, even though some of the stuff is still doing well. But we sell a V-brake. It was really highly successful. But now no one runs V-brakes. It's all disc, right? And we never really made a disc brake. So I think you have to really be on top of what's going on and know that certain things could last 10 years. I think was somewhat the max. And certain things are only going to last for a few, so you got to be on top of it. So,
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I think I know where this question's going to go, but talk to me today as we sit, and this is in the end of April of 2025. What are the biggest challenges for you in SYNDYT right now?
Well, I know you know where that was going. Well, right now, I think the tariff thing. I think that's the big thing. I really try to make the company feed a lot of mouths along the way. So when you buy something, companies got to make money. My distributors who have supported me for the last 25 and 30 years have to make money. My dealers have to make money, right? So we have these mouths to feed. And with the new tariffs, it's like, how do we feed all those people without putting the price point out and above what the consumer can afford? There's only a certain level. Our new SYNDYT frames are priced very strategically, a little bit under some of our customers, but giving you a lot more, features in that. But everybody in that chain's, making money, right? So, but I do have a lot of inventory. I was lucky I had that inventory come in before the tariff situation. But moving forward, I'm working on literally 70 different things right now. And I always am. How's that going to impact it? How's that going to impact who I sell this to and how I get to the end user at a price they can afford? So that's kind of the focus right now, really, is how we do that. Do Do we reduce the features? Do we, we just suck it up? But if we suck it up, we're not making any money, so we can bring that product to market.
Right.
But all these things I'm working on right now, I can't go backwards. I got to get it done. I got to get this product to market, and people are expecting me to do this. So, I think that's the biggest challenges right now. And then, what's funny was the frame took off really, really well. We're in about 25 countries. We've only been shipping for 5 months, and I did a little post yesterday looking at all the countries that the frame has made it to, distributors or whatever, and it's not 25 that I know of. How do we keep feeding those guys, and how do we keep that momentum going with all that's going on, right? So, going to be interesting in the next few years how we do that. And when I'm talking to these customers to buy my bikes, there's a lot of other bikes that they have. So I'm got to wait for those bikes to move out of the way before I can start to grow that 25 countries. So I talked to a certain country who took a lot of bikes from another competitor of mine, and he shows me a picture of his building going full of these. I want yours, but these have to go away first. So being new like that, I think that's a challenge too. You have to let people go through their product cycles on that side. There's a cycle, right? And there's a lot of people have a lot of inventory right now, and probably good for them because of the tariffs. But so we have to kind of go through that too. And we know that the frame is really, really what everybody wants right now. It's got its reasons for why we designed what we did, and people are starting to understand that. And it's definitely the next generation for BMX racing for sure. So.
Well, and I think that's, what you touch on the end. I think people kind of forget about that when they're in a product-based business. They forget that when they're working with retailers, those retailers only have a certain amount of shelf space, right? You may have the best thing since sliced bread, but they've got money tied up in inventory as it is. And they need to turn that inventory before they can open it up for your sliced bread. I had a former client of mine out of Texas that makes baseball bats. And he was working for a major sports distributor on the western half of the U.S. And he was talking to them about, getting his bat in there, and they were able to give him one slot next to a bunch of others, right? And they liked the bats. They wanted to get him in. He continued to lobby for more, but we only have so much shelf space. We got to get through these before we can get to yours. And that's a challenge for anybody in a product-based business.
Well, it's funny that brings up a story. So in the Fender days, I made what we called a shroud. It basically went to the bottom of your frame. It kept the mud from coming up from the bottom. The first thing I made was the fender that kind of kept from the tire. But this was an extension of it. It went to the bottom of your frame. Well, there was another company had already made one. It was just it looked like a milk carton on the bottom of your bike. It was ugly. So I made one. It was sexy and beautiful and all these kind of things. And it was a part of the whole THD gamut. I had a customer in England who was doing 90,000 a year pieces of the other one. I'm thinking, I'm going to get this 90,000, man. No, look at mine. Look at what they're selling. So they bought a few of them, and like after 3 or 4 months, I'm like, what are we doing? They're like, nope, we're not going to risk those 90,000 units and push that guy out of the way and put you in. We don't know. We just don't know. And I never did I never got them up to that far because they were happy and comfortable with what they had. The consumers were buying that, and they weren't giving up that slice of the pie just because mine was sexier. So there's that too, right?
There's that too.
Yeah.
And I think the tariffs thing, I think what it does for small business is it makes it unpredictable right now, right? They haven't settled it. The tariffs have been high and lower, and they're on, they're off, and it's not a political discussion. It's really about what does this do to a small business, right? It really swings us back and forth. We think we're going out of business because the tariffs are going to eat all our margin and then some. There's just no way we can sell it at that price. And then it's off, or it's off for 90 days. And so, well, that's great for 90 days, but then what? How do I build that in? And all of that just creates unpredictability. And it's an interesting challenge. I hope to see us all on the other side of this very soon. Whatever that means, whether that's some sort of permanence to the policies, or if it's or if they go by the wayside to some extent, at least with certain countries and certain ones. Who knows?
Well, we've done a lot of research where we can move, because I'm working on a complete bicycle now, and that was the next step. I mean, the frame was about getting the brand, showing the technology, showing all these things, but it's not the end game. It's the complete bike line. It's the juvenile bike line. It's the sidewalk bike line. It's all this stuff that gets us to do a really good job in the juvenile market, which some of the bigger companies don't care as much about, because the profit margin on a $200 bicycle or $300 bicycle for a kid is not the same as a $10,000 gravel bike, right? So a lot of the companies over periods of time start to tend to go that direction. So we're focusing on that. But so we start looking at different countries, but it changes. Like, could you imagine picking up, you're making something in one country, you got to pick up that and move it to another country. Well, being a small guy, not even having the bikes yet, even though BOMs are done, we're trying to find the right country right now to put them in. And then we have to watch the quality of that country so it doesn't affect our brand image. But could you imagine being a big guy like a Huffy or somebody like that, who has a bulk of their bikes in a certain region, and they got to pick it all up and move it quickly. Otherwise, they're going to hurt a lot more than we're going to hurt. My fixed overhead is very, very small. So, those guys, if they're not moving bikes, they're in trouble, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how they all navigate this. And the bigger they are, the harder they're going to, harder it's going to be, I should say. So
yeah, harder, whether they fall or not will remain to be
I don't want to say harder than they fall. I don't want to say that.
Exactly. That's what I was kind of to get to. Yeah, I think that the interesting thing is that they may have been given incentives, or they may have just seen the benefits of building in another country, and they've got a plant that they have built because of the volume that they have, because it was better to build and fill a place rather than to rent space with somebody else. And now that's making it difficult for them to pack up and move.
Right. And I'm looking at moving the bike production to another country. And everybody's looking at the same country. Now the country's saying, well, we're full capacity until 25. We can't help you until 26, right? So that kind of stuff too, So yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, because a lot of those countries that don't have major tariffs are not the largest countries.
Right, exactly.
They're the smaller ones.
They've lost volume over to the bigger countries over time too. So they're not set up to take all this back.
Nope.
So yeah. And
interesting.
I would love to make one here, but I was looking at another brand the other day. Someone in the Midwest, and I'll never forget the name, was a juvenile bike company, and I was doing my research, and there's a sidewalk bike, and they assemble in the U.S. and they just got a big grant to assemble to basically grow their business. But if you look at what they're doing, all the product is coming in from overseas, and they're assembling here. Yeah. And there's no way I think they were talking about the new resources they have to actually make the frame here, but there's no way they're going to make a tire, a hub, a handle grip, a seat. They're not going to. There's no way they could tool all that up, make all that here in America, and put this bike together for $200 or $300, whatever the price point was. Right? Not going to happen. So where are we going to get our $300 kids bikes next year? Where's that going to come from? So we'll have to see. So.
All right. Well, again, hopefully by the time people are listening to this in a few weeks, things will change for the better. And a few weeks later, we will all keep adjusting to this, and we'll just see where we are.
Yeah. But welcome to entrepreneurial, right?
Welcome to entrepreneurial life, right? And that's kind of where I wanted to get to kind of tie it up for us. Is you've been in this for a few decades now. Talk to me about maybe that number one lesson, maybe I'll give you two, that you would give to a new entrepreneur today. What would you tell them?
Well, first of all, I say don't give up on your passion, right?
Yeah.
I think that if you have the passion, you have to see it through. You'll definitely have obstacles and hurdles along the way, for sure. Pick the right partners and understand your market. I think that's the real thing, because you might not have a partner in the sense of financial partner, but you're going to have a partner as a vendor. You're going to have a partner as a distributor. You're going to have a partner as a retailer. You're going to have partners along the way. There's no way you're going to do it all. So I think you got to pick that right partner, that whole sling of partners that you have to deal with along the way from the beginning to the end. So make sure you got that in check, so you're not carrying burden with them, or you have people who can help you with some of the things you're not the best at. So picking the right partners and seeing the vision through, I think, are what I've had to learn. Sometimes I've backed out on visions and see it happen later on. And then protect your ideas to some extent, right? And look to the future and say, hey, if I don't innovate tomorrow, I will not be here. So, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Good. Well, Toby, I appreciate the time. It's been a pleasure.
Cool. Thanks, Russ. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Appreciate it.
So that's a wrap for this episode of Legacy Unscripted. If today's conversation sparks something in you, don't just let it sit. Take action today to build your future. Make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share this with someone who may need to hear it. And if you've got a story to share or you want to just connect, you know where to find me. Until next time, keep it real, keep it bold, and keep living your legacy.